And we want to do it in a fair and even-handed manner so that not all the questions are directed at one or the other of our two speakers, but we have a fair balance between questions directed toward Christianity and questions directed toward atheism. And this leads me to the other part of the rules for tonight, which is that we hope that this is really going to be what we say it is, namely an honest conversation between Christianity and atheism. We want this to be polite, respectful, civil, ironic, in the best sense of that word. These two gentlemen have already met and talked, they have become friends, and they will be respectful of one another, and we hope that all of you... What's going on behind my back here? What? You're giving me bunny ears, right? This is my cue that I'm talking too long, right? Okay. And we expect you to be respectful of them as well in the questions that you ask. So, if you write down your questions as we proceed, give them to someone who will be strolling around, wave your hand in the air, and they'll come up to me, and then we'll start asking questions at an appropriate moment and get through as many of them as we possibly can. Okay? So I want to start by inviting each of them to say something about what drew them to an interest in religion, whether they come at it from the perspective of Christianity or the perspective of atheism. What is it that drew them into this topic, into this field, and what kind of reflections would they offer on their own experiences and their own musings about these questions? So who's going first? I don't know either. No, I don't. I came broke for buying dinner. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to try to use this thing. There may be a lot of... I apologize in advance for that. So in terms of my background, if you'd like to understand where I'm coming from, let me start off by saying I was not raised in a church-going home. We celebrated Christian holidays, but it was mainly just about getting together with family, enjoying a good meal and each other's company. It had no real religious significance attached to it. One of the interests I had, though, as a child was in Greek and Roman mythology. So I would go to the school library and get out the book and read all about Zeus and all the other mythological figures. So, oh, these are some interesting stories. And of course, still growing up surrounded by a largely Christian culture, it's not like my parents hid this from me either. I mean, they would tell me some stories. I had a rough idea how the account of Jesus' life and death went. But I would hear other stories from the Old Testament. And the Greek mythology on the one hand and the stories I would hear from the Bible on the other, to somebody who's not raised to believe in any of it, it all sounds pretty much the same. You hear, somebody transformed himself into a bull and raped a woman and they had a half-god child. And then you also hear somebody was swallowed by a fish and was in there for a while and came back out again still alive. And it all sounds pretty much the same to you. And the curious thing to me at that age was just, everybody acknowledges that some of these stories are false. But there seem to be a lot of people out here who still believe the other ones. So isn't that strange? Then I got old enough to start hearing about some of the dark side of things that have been done in the name of religion. I started to hear about things like holy wars, inquisitions, persecution based on religious beliefs. And my attitude toward religion changed at that point, from one of curiosity, isn't that strange, to one that was very anti-religion then. I really thought this was a big problem. Not only were people believing weird things, but they were hurting other people because of them. And so as a teenager, that was my attitude. I tried to talk people out of being religious whenever I could. And I wish I could say that there was something better that happens next in the story, something deeper or more intellectual. I had a really big crush on a girl who was serious about being Christian halfway through high school. And I said, well, you don't think she's an idiot, do you? Well, no. She gets good grades. Maybe there's something more to this religion stuff that you just haven't picked up on yet. And I was just sort of also at the right point in my life where my mind was ready to be open. I felt like I had kind of an awakening experience at that point, just to new ideas and to spirituality. it was too late to save my standing with the girl. She had already given up on me and moved on. After hearing for months, why her religion was wrong and stupid, she was, But I swung way the other way, and I decided religion was awesome. And not any one particular one, all of them. So I would go to school wearing a fish necklace and a yin and yang headband and an ankh necklace, all on the same day. All these different religious symbols, and I would talk about religious wisdom whenever I could. And at some point, I started to feel like, this is a little bit inauthentic. Here I am spending all this time claiming to be this deep spiritual person, and at other times I recognize I'm just an average teenage kid worrying about how we can get a date. Maybe I need to figure out what I really think about this stuff. That's what led me to study philosophy when I went to college. I thought, philosophers, those are the people who think about this kind of thing. Those are the people who are going to have the answers for me. And I'll study philosophy until I get all the answers I need and I find out all the truth there is to know about religion. And then I'll switch my major to whatever I want to do for a living. By my junior year, it became clear there was nothing else I wanted to do for a living. And I'd already put all that time into philosophy. One thing I noticed, though, and this is, I promise, I know I'm going on a little bit here. We're getting close to the end of my story. One thing that I was impressed by studying philosophy, rather than figuring out all the answers, there was just more and more questions. And the fact that there were a lot of things human beings didn't know, and sort of comparing what we didn't know or couldn't know to what we did, it seemed almost foolish to me to put too much stock in any kind of belief that you knew exactly what the world was like. So questions of what do you believe, what beliefs do you hold firm, became less important to me. I wasn't smart enough to have that level of conviction and beliefs, and I didn't frankly think that anybody was in a good position to really claim the new things. On the level I would have wanted to know them in order to say I have 100% dedication and devotion to this worldview. I tried on different labels. I tried calling myself an atheist for a while, an agnostic for a while. I tried calling myself a Christian pluralist. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that idea. There's an idea there that the religions have all interacted with some kind of divine reality that's out there, but they've all kind of processed it through the lens of their own culture. And so none of them has the exact objective truth about what that divine reality is like. But they're all sort of doing the best they can, reaching out to it. I thought maybe I could sort of be a Christian under that banner. There was a point in my life where, I tried it. One of my friends, I was working as a campus minister, and I was going to church services a lot. And I thought, well, where's my place within Christianity? And ultimately, I decided that I just could not say I had the beliefs on the level that one, I think, needs to in order to really call themselves Christian. At the same time, I was kind of giving up on worldviews and beliefs. I was more and more impressed, though, by the spiritual lessons that I found in holy books such as the Bible. And so my focus kind of shifted from, I need to figure out what I should believe, to more of a, look at all these interesting ideas that are out there for people to explore. And how could these different ideas help me to see events in my life? And in that context, religion has remained very important to me. Nonetheless, I'm standing up here defending an atheist worldview, largely because I do not, in fact, share the fundamental doctrinal beliefs that come along with Christianity. Thanks. You want mine? You gotta come over here. Now I'm the Christian.
That's coming later. I'm just kidding. Thank you for welcoming me to the valley here in South Texas. This is my fourth trip down here. I came down in a golf junket a few years ago. Really enjoyed that. Love the weather, the setting, and so forth. And then this is my third trip to UTPA, so thank you so much for having me here. I grew up in a, I might say, a nominal religious home. I wasn't really an active Christian growing up in southern Minnesota. We went to a mainline church, and we were pretty active there. We were musicians, so we sang in the choir and that sort of thing, but it was never that meaningful to me. I was confirmed as a 10th grader, I think, and once I got done with that, I was kind of done with the institution. I went away and played some music around the country for a while with a band, my brothers and myself, and I came back just an empty soul. My friends from high school, some of them had become more active Christians, more serious Christians, more Bible-believing Christians, and I just saw a spark in their life that I wanted for mine. They were majoring in joy and care for others. I was majoring in despair and sarcasm, pretty much. And so mostly on an emotional basis, I made the switch from my quasi-theistic worldview to more of an active, Bible-believing evangelical Christian. And I was on a high for that, maybe for a few months, 6 months or so. And then I kind of came back to earth by saying, oh, wait a second, what have I done here? Is this even true? I've given my life to this belief system, and I did it largely on an emotional basis. Is there any philosophical, scientific backing for this? Any evidence that this might be true? Well, that launched me into a program of study that went on for the next 35 years. And I mean, even today, I study, I think, I read the other side, I read the atheists, read the agnostics, read the Muslims, read the Christians, and just always evaluating that question, is what I've done true? And I think I can say that after 35 years of doing that, I'm pretty settled where I am, but I guess I'm still open to being wrong. And that might come as a shock to some Christians, actually. But it's a true thing about me. So when I sit down across the table in a student union, and I travel the country and do this kind of thing, and I'm sitting there with a person who believes different than me, I'm actually listening. I'm trying to hear what they say and why they hold to what they hold. And could I possibly learn something from this person? And then I've noticed that if I adopt that posture, and it's true, and I'm not just feigning it, but if that's true about me and my posture, it tends to open them up as well. Well, now you've got a partner. Now you've got a dialogue partner, and the two of you can proceed on a search for truth together, two people that believe differently. And I love that kind of journey. And mostly I get criticized by Christians for doing that because they think I'm soft in my beliefs, which isn't true at all. I hold to my beliefs because I think they're true, not just because I think they work, or that they're handy, or that they give me emotional support. I mean, those things, that they do give me emotional support, but that's not why I'm there. I'm there because I think it's true. And if it wasn't true, I would be the first one out of here. I really would. Well, skeptics then tend to say to me, well, then what would it take to falsify your belief? And that's probably a longer discussion. I'll just give one example. Christianity claims to be historic religion. It claims to be grounded and rooted in first century Palestinian history, other history as well, Old Testament and so forth. But if you just focus there for a second, first century Palestinian Jewish history. That's the context of it. And if that whole scene, the life of Christ, the death of Christ, and the resurrection of Christ were falsified historically using normal methods of history, I would really take a look at that. I really would. I don't just hold to this because I want it to be true. Although, I do want it to be true. I admit that. But that's not the reason I hold to it. I think it is true. So that makes dialogue come alive. I mean, then when you're talking with someone, there's suddenly something at stake here. And if it's at stake for me, then maybe it's at stake for the other person as well. And that's my hope, because I try to be persuasive. And I make no bones about that. But I try to be persuasive with a fellow journeyer going on this road together with me, where the two of us on maybe different sides of that same road can learn something from each other. One of the things that we decided we were going to do, Michael and I, as we launched into this evening, was to say something about what we appreciate about the other side, and then maybe say something about what troubles us about the other side. I think what I appreciate about atheism, especially the more vocal atheism here of the late 20th century and 21st century, is that atheists are forcing Christians to give reasons for things. Atheists are saying, oh, what about this flood? What about this donkey that talks? What about this Genesis account? What about the life of Jesus? Is there as good a historical evidence as you all say there is? And so Christians at times have been scrambling to come up with responses that will satisfy these questions. And so the atheist folks that I hang out with, I always seem to have a lot of atheist friends. I tend to click with that crowd somewhat. I mean, they press these questions against me and they want real answers. And if I just kind of throw out Christian cliches that, well, you just have to have faith, and you just have to read the Bible, and, well, how do you know the Bible's true? Well, because the Bible says the Bible's true, and, you know, they're not gonna put up with that. They're going to say, no, we're not going to let you jump into this circular reasoning, or we're not going to allow you to just throw out these Christian cliches and think they have some power in our lives, because they don't. And we want to know, you seem like a fairly intelligent guy, why would it have power in your life? And then I have to say, well, Christian philosophers and theologians have actually been working on these issues for a long time. And maybe I can be the sort of popularizer who reads all that and condenses it and help lay people who don't have training see those sorts of things. But I think the atheists have done a service to the Christian community by demanding that Christians back up what they say. So I really appreciate that. Secondly, I mean, if you're in the atheist community much, and I'm there sometimes, not all the time, but I'm there sometimes, there's a high value on science. And at times, Christians haven't shared that high value. I mean, I happen to share that high value, so I get along with these folks pretty well. But they look to science, and they are saying, what can you show us scientifically that might indicate your worldview is true? And that is a helpful question. If that question wasn't there, would Christians be, would they be motivated enough to do good work in those areas? And some would, but I don't think it would be nearly as much as it has been. So atheists are asking us Christians to think critically, and I really appreciate that about atheism. And there's some things that maybe trouble me about atheism. It feels mechanical to me at times. A truly materialistic, physicalistic world, if that's the underlying reality of our world, and then that becomes the underlying reality of me as a person. And it seems to me that there's more to my life than just the physical, more to my life than just the material. And once you start with pure physicality, once you start with purely a material world, to me that does raise problems. And thoughtful atheists address these problems, so that's cool. I'm not saying there's nothing out there. But it's tougher, I would say, at least, to build a system of ethics. Not that atheists aren't ethical, most of them are. I'm just saying it's tough to build systematically an ethical approach to life that's grounded in purely material, physical realm. So that's always troubling to me, and you and I talked about that a bit yesterday, and I want to hear your comments again about that. Secondly, atheism at times, not always, and I don't want to be heard to be making these sweeping generalizations all the time, but atheism at times has abused its power. If you look at the communist dictators of the 20th century, I mean, my atheist friends are always talking to me about the Crusades and the Inquisition and the Old Testament God. They're pressing that stuff on me all the time, the Salem witch hunts and so forth. And I don't hear much from them about Stalin and Pol Pot and all these dictators that abused their power, in my view, because they had no one to be accountable to that was higher than themselves. And if you go back and look at the indoctrination of atheist principles in early 20th century Soviet Russia, that is not a pretty picture for the kids who grew up in the schools there. So there's stuff on both sides of the aisle here. Christians, I'll be the first to admit, it hasn't always been a pretty picture. That has been the case with the other side at times. Not always, right? At times as well. Yeah, do we have two mics working here? This is kind of frustrating.
This is good though. I can go from here. So, what part do we want to talk about first? Let's go to the part about the kind of worldview that's available to an atheist. And you mentioned the difficulty in building some kind of a moral system with that worldview. I want to address on a personal level and then on a more theoretical level, that kind of question. On a personal level, as I mentioned before, I was raised in a home where there wasn't really a lot of talk about religion or God being the basis for anything. But I was certainly taught to believe in objective right and wrong. I was certainly taught that you needed to treat other people with respect, and that was a very firm lesson. That wasn't just an opinion. There was a right way and a wrong way to do things. You needed to be honest. You needed to treat other people with the same kind, as having the same kind of value that you yourself had. So in terms because they had no belief that they were accountable to anyone. Of course, you also acknowledge that people who claimed they were accountable to somebody else still carried that out. But it's certainly true that for some people, they probably are sort of better behaved, or they wouldn't pay attention to certain important lessons. You know, the ones my parents ingrained in me without a religious basis, there may be plenty of people out there who, if they did stop believing in a God, their sense of morality would go with it. And that they do stay in line mainly because they think they are accountable to not just an ideal or a principle of how to treat people, but to someone, an actual authority, who's higher than them. Now, in terms of theory, that gets a little bit tricky. On the one hand, you can see where somebody whose view of the world is just that it's a bunch of cold, dead matter, and some of it happens to configure in these very complex ways, with brains and nervous systems and complicated behaviors. You say, well, you know, where in all that is there any room for right or wrong? Isn't it just sort of things doing, physical systems doing what physics declares they will? I can see where that point of view comes from. On the other hand, there's the idea that there, I mean, to me anyway, it seems more noble or somehow more deeply moral to be doing something that's good and right simply out of the recognition that it is good and right, rather than because you think there's some kind of an authority figure who could punish you for stepping out of line. And I know, like, a sophisticated Christian model of why you're going to be good and do good things gets into the idea of love and the idea of compassion, and it's not just, oh, I better kiss God's butt so I can go to heaven and not hell. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm portraying Christianity as just being this system where everybody's taught to only do good because otherwise God will spank you. Nonetheless, just comparing two people within the Christian tradition, the one who seems to get it in my mind about how they were supposed to be taught to do right things and why they were supposed to be doing the right things clearly seems to have sort of a leg up in terms of nobility or in terms of the depth of their moral character and understanding compared to a person who's doing it strictly out of obedience to authority. And so I would suggest that anybody who's really going to do right, and anybody who's really going to get it about morality on the level I would like to see people get it, that's the part where having the authority or not becomes less relevant, because people can do that on either side, and even the people who recognize the authority should be doing it for other reasons other than just the big guy's going to get me. As far as the more theoretical side of building an ethics, of course, there have been plenty of ethics systems out there that did not try to base themselves in religion. Perhaps the most well-known of these is utilitarianism, which is basically a view that says, try to make the world as good as you can make it. Consider everybody who's going to be affected by your action. Consider all the happiness or joy that you could bring to them, and also all the suffering and pain that you could bring to them by the various actions that are before you, and choose the action that seems to do the best job of getting the good stuff and avoiding the bad. As long as people are capable of feeling emotions like joy, feeling suffering, that system seems to have a grounding there in terms of the value and the outputs for people. Personally, that's not the kind of system I subscribe to. I prefer one that looks to basic facts about human nature to set a standard for what's really important for a human being to not just live in the world, but to also flourish in the world and truly to develop to the full potential that they have. I think part of that means looking at the fact that we have the ability to reason. I really appreciate what Rick said earlier about sort of him appreciating atheists for pushing Christians to not just immediately play the faith card and to take a look at having reasons for their beliefs. I think being the kind of beings who search for reasons for things, and the kind of beings who search for things like meaning and purpose, which I think you say, well, maybe you can't find those so much in a worldview that doesn't have something beyond us in it. I think we're all looking for that. I think we're pretty good at making it for ourselves. We're pretty good at finding things that we're passionate about and devoting ourselves to those things. My own view of ethics has more to do with a combination of those two views. On the big picture, that there are things about human beings like our rationality, like our status as social beings. Maybe there are a few human beings out there who don't mind being alone all the time, but especially in this day and age, with all the technology we have, even those who have a lot of social anxiety probably have their community that they hang around with in virtual space, in the World of Warcraft or wherever. I think the fact that we're social and that we really don't feel good without having strong social bonds and good social relationships is something that's very important and can set a foundation for ethics. That and the drive we all have to find meaning and to find our own passion in life. Those are the things that I would point to as a basis for an ethics if you want more theory rather than just sort of personal experience. I do think, I said earlier, one of the things I really like about religion, and even as I sort of gave up beliefs and gave up even worrying about what my beliefs were, was the spiritual lessons that I took from it. That is one of the things that I appreciate most about Christianity and the Christian message, is this idea, when I was talking about strong social bonds, the idea that we are all fundamentally equal and that we are all sort of brothers and sisters in this world who need to be taking care of each other rather than seeing each other in a competitive way, rather than seeing life as a game and I want to be the winner. I think that's one of the most beautiful messages from Christianity. Do you want to respond directly, or do you want me to give you a challenge? Or?
No, I just was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the theoretical jump from kind of physicality, materialism, into the kind of ethics, which I agree with, that you just mentioned. I'm still missing that jump.
Well, I'm not trying to start off by thinking about atoms in the void.
Okay.
I'm starting off with human experience as it's lived. And I know you have other things to ask about along those lines, too. In terms of, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I guess apparently I do.
No, go ahead.
So in terms of the ability science has to give us sort of, from a third-person perspective, what attempts to be an objective account of the world we live in, and that what it might be missing is some of the ways it actually feels to be human from a first-person perspective. And what's it like to walk around as one of these things in your daily life? Seems like we have free will. We certainly have conscious experience. That, to me, is the more difficult jump to make, because I'm perfectly willing to say, hey, first-person experience needs to be part of a worldview. I'm not somebody who wants to say that science can give us a complete worldview all on its own. I don't think something that stays strictly to a third-person perspective is going to be able to give you a full account of things that we experience most directly in the first person. Sure, you can do brain imaging. You can see which parts of the brain seem to be associated with certain emotions or certain thought processes. Are you going to get anything that explains not only that this particular light frequency gives you that familiar look of red when it strikes your eyes, but why that particular light frequency gives you the look of red instead of some other look when it strikes your eyes? Or as people love to bring Einstein into these things. There's that quote, science will never give us the taste of chicken soup, right? I mean, you can analyze it down, you can figure out what the different parts of the tongue do, but ultimately why they do that instead of other things based on their chemical configuration. I agree, there's things science probably is never going to get to there.
I have a friend in the Twin Cities who is one of the leading outspoken atheists in Minnesota, really. And he doesn't believe in free will. And